Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. It's hard to believe today, but there was once a time when a British Prime Minister might say something like, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." End quote. Well, now apparently the price is right for surrender. Whatever the cost may be. Stacey?
I'm sure many Brits will love that Churchillian quote in an American accent. It's quite good. He was
Oh, that was
American.
Churchill?
Yeah.
I thought it was the guy who sold insurance on TV.
He was quite American, half American anyway. Well, America has come to the UK, American ideology and policy in terms of fracking. North Yorkshire Council fracking decision, a declaration of war. Anti-fracking campaigners have accused North Yorkshire Council of declaring war on people's rights to clean air and water after it approved the first operation to frack for shale gas in 5 years. Now, notice that they call them anti-fracking campaigners rather than just people living there who don't want their water and air polluted and all we've already covered this, the never-ending number of lorries that have to come in to bring in water to frack and also all the equipment. Now, the name of the town is very British, where they're building this, where they've approved this well to be fracked. Kirby Misperton.
Kirby Misperton. Kirby Misperton. Crispy Murbin.
And the well is known as KM8, or in internet language, I guess that would be okay, mate.
Right. Well, we knew that the fracking was going to happen regardless of what anybody said. The population, that we live in the age of impunity. There's an agenda to extract wealth, and anyone who gets in the way is exterminated. So, we're all Palestinians to that extent, and the people in this town, Pikatika, wherever it is, in frickin' northern, somewhere north, they're the Gaza of Britain. They're just going to get rolled over by the bulldozers. Nobody cares. They have no rights. They have no agency. Fracking itself has been proven to be completely uneconomic. It just creates huge loads of debt that never get paid back. Then the frackers disappear, having taken their fees, and they leave you with the ecological devastation.
Yes, well, in terms of, they claim to be kind of democratic. They said, well, we're going to let the people speak. We want to hear what you think about bringing fracking to this community. It's going to bring jobs. They always say jobs. That's the thing that they try to buy people off with. Well, it turns out that they did receive representations, as they call them, and there were 4,375 people who said they were against it, and 36 in the community who were for it. So the government looked at it and said, well, those 36 people have a good point, and we're going to go with them. Now, the government has said it is going all out for shale. That's the quote from them, and that's going to come into play later when we talk about Hillary Clinton and how she came over as Secretary of State to force Europe to adopt shale. But I want to look at the fact that people who are against fracking point out that you can look to America and see they've had fracking for 8 years now, or 10 years, and you can see what it's actually caused, and it's caused water contamination, earthquakes, noise and traffic pollution, and we've seen that over and over. Now, in the U.S., there are very, very few regulations against any of the water contamination. For example, we have the Clean Water Act in America, but frackers are exempt from that. Here, they're not going to be exempt from those sort of things, and even in America, with no environmental regulations on frackers, it's been unprofitable. Here, they are going to have to abide by environmental regulations, which means it's going to be even less profitable.
Well, they don't need to make a profit to generate fees.
Yes.
Just like in the City of London, those banks don't need to make profits to generate fees. Hedge fund managers don't need to make profits to generate fees. Politicians don't need to deliver to generate bribes. That we live in the age of impunity, that we've got an entrenched oligarch class of kleptocrats who just steal all day long, and if anyone gets in their way, they are marginalized, kicked off the grid, or killed.
So in North Yorkshire, you have about 125 people per square kilometer. Now I'm going to compare it to Wyoming, where you have about 4 people per square kilometer. So a tiny, tiny fraction of the percentage of what North Yorkshire has. Here is a headline from just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this is "Fracking can contaminate drinking water." It took nearly a decade, but former Environmental Protection Agency scientist Dominic DiGiulio has proved that fracking has polluted groundwater in Wyoming. So 8 years ago, people in Pavilion, Wyoming, living in the middle of a natural gas basin, complained of a bad taste and smell in their drinking water. US EPA launched an inquiry helmed by DiGiulio, and preliminary testing suggested that the groundwater contained toxic chemicals. Then, in 2013, the agency suddenly transferred the investigation to state regulators without publishing a final report. So this guy left the EPA. Now he's releasing the information that their water is poisoned, but the EPA, the government regulator, refuses to let the people know themselves. They did not release this information. They in fact, they did the study. They didn't release the information. And this is a sort of, maybe America's more extreme in terms of what will be tolerated here, but probably not.
Every few years the government launches a campaign to try to establish what are British values.
Oh, yeah.
Every few years, just what are British values? Well, there are no British values other than to allow foreign frackers to come in and destroy your country. I mean, that's a value, I suppose, but it's nothing to be proud of, I wouldn't think. But, to replace the Union Jack with fracking rigs, frack under the Buckingham Palace. I'm sure there's plenty of gas underneath there.
In fact, in Oklahoma is the next place we're going to go where there has been a lot of fracking, and they were allowed to frack under the state capitol. So that's how pro-fracking they are in Oklahoma.
House of Parliament, frack under there. It's a useless organization run by nincompoops. Plenty of gas underneath there.
Now, remember, North Yorkshire has 125 people per square kilometer. Oklahoma has about 35. So again, a fraction of the population density that North Yorkshire has. Oklahoma takes action on fracking-related earthquakes, but it's too late, critics say. So more than 5 years after Oklahoma first experienced a startling increase in earthquakes linked to the disposal of huge volumes of wastewater created by hydraulic fracturing for oil, the state continues to shake, and the number of strong quakes is increasing. In 2009, there were 20 quakes of magnitude 3 or higher, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Last year, there were 890. In 2009, no quake measured 4.0 or greater. Last year, 30 did. So here's a map of Oklahoma. All those orange dots, all the dots are earthquakes. All the orange dots are bigger than 3.0, and those ones are the mega ones over 4.0, and up to 5.1 they had just a few weeks ago, and that was felt across 7 neighboring states.
Well, look, fracking will create jobs, but not as they're being described by the government. They're going to create jobs for palliative care in cancer wards and hospices for the dying from people who get cancer from the fracking. There's your jobs, but it's not going to create anything meaningful. And
there were a lot of high-paying jobs in America. There averaged about $100,000 workers, so maybe 65, 70,000 pounds. The salaries were in the fracking fields across America. Now, however, the cost. In Wyoming, you have huge swathes of the landscape with abandoned wells, and the companies go bankrupt, and they say we don't have the money to
right. No,
clean
you
it up.
get a high-paying job for a couple of years. The fracking well extinguishes itself very quickly. You never generate enough energy to pay off the debt. It's a money-losing proposition economically. There's a lot of jobs for prostitutes. All those English lasses can go up north and, put out a shingle and show some thigh, baby. You get a job.
Now, again, in Oklahoma, now a lot of the people are very upset because if you've ever lived through an earthquake, a 5.1 is pretty big and it is pretty terrifying. And these are happening non-stop all through the night, and people can't sleep. So, however, the Republican-controlled legislature passed legislation last year that prevents local governments from ordering moratoriums on wastewater injections into the ground. So it's the water injection. You have to get rid of the wastewater. There's a huge quantity. There's 1.8 billion tons of wastewater were created, or gallons were created last year in Oklahoma alone, and they have to do something with it, so they inject it into the ground, and that's causing the fractures that were already there in the crust to cause earthquakes. Now, remember also in Denton, Texas, which is where fracking began, the people there voted against. They passed a law to ban fracking, and then the state government said they're not allowed to do that. They passed a new law saying that you're not allowed to have your own local choices. So here we turn to Hillary Clinton and the fact that nobody outside of the U.S. empire is they're all like these local groups that want to ban the fracking. These, whether they're in Oklahoma or in Denton, Texas, they don't have a choice. So here, Hillary Clinton's energy initiative pressed countries to embrace fracking, new emails reveal. So when she was on the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton up in northern New York, in the New York State area outside of New York City, where there is a moratorium on fracking, that the people don't want fracking there. It's some of the freshest groundwater in the world. They've banned fracking for now. And she went out there and pretended that she is also against it and that the local people should always be able to decide. Well, far from challenging fossil fuel companies, her leaked emails show, the emails obtained by The Intercept show that State Department officials worked closely with private sector oil and gas companies, pressed other agencies within the Obama administration to commit federal government resources, including technical assistance for locating shale reserves, and distributed agreements with partner nations pledging to help secure investments for new fracking projects. So here you see the Churchill, of course, during the World War II, we were fighting against corporatism. Here we now have a kinder, gentler face of corporatism, of the government and private sector forcing their will, forcing their way upon the population, whatever the population wants. And for Europe, Hillary Clinton and her whole State Department apparatus, on behalf of Chevron and the likes, went in and used Poland as a test case. They thought that was the weakest link and that they could get them to force fracking onto the people who did not want it.
They invaded Poland?
Yeah, essentially. It's always Poland first.
Poland, why are you always getting invaded like that? Well, remember TTIP, of course, when that passes, that means that there'll be even less recourse. And if you get in the way of the frackers, you have to pay triple the damages, according to them, their definition of. In other words, there's no money to be made, but they'll sue the government anyway to reclaim money and make money in legalities and lawsuits. But the actual economics of this business of hydraulic fracturing is a money loser from day one. More energy goes in that comes out, more debt comes in that can ever be paid off.
They want yield. So that's what the investors in the fracking industry in America, why that we have that disaster there, is bond investors are desperate for yield. They poured money into it. Now the whole industry has collapsed, leaving ghost towns and earthquakes everywhere.
Oh, why are they desperate for yield? Because central banks put interest rate to zero to bail out the hedge funds and the bankers. So now they're creating phantom industries called fracking to make up for the income differential. Both sides of the equation are bankrupt from the get-go. All right, well, we must frack on to the second half.
Frack on, baby.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Boulder, Colorado, and talk to our favorite deflationist, Rick Ackerman of rickackerman.com. Rick was formerly a journalist at Barron's, and before that, a market maker on the Pacific Stock Exchange. Rick, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Hey, glad to be with you, Max.
All right, Rick Ackerman, let's talk about deflation. You are a deflationist. You have been for quite some time, and quite remarkably and accurately predicting the deflation gripping the world. You see another collapse on the horizon. Is that correct, Rick? And many see this now, but what happens talk a little bit about this. What do you see happening?
Well, I've been focused on it for a long time, Max. I did a column for the San Fran Examiner in the mid-'90s, and I hung them out on the lunatic fringe with a deflationary scenario back then that in retrospect looked really mild. Macy's was having problems, and the deflationary view was Macy's affecting all its suppliers, and you get sort of a cascade in retail. But in the same way that we didn't have the imagination back then to see how pumped things could get, the S&L crisis was another case in point. It looked disastrous, but when you look at the numbers, which were only in the $400 to $600 billion category, it was just chump change. But now, even though it's impossible to predict what would trigger the event, the most deflationary thing I could possibly conceive of would be the banks failing to open one Monday. And it wouldn't be like the 30s or post-1929 market crash where people lined up outside of banks. We had a lot more physical money, cash money at the time. And if you lined up outside the bank, you at least had some hope that they would have some currency on hand to make you whole. But as you know, we're in a digital cash system. And I think that the whole edifice of digital cash is supported on misplaced trust. So for whatever reason, whatever sends that trust into a dive, the clearing mechanisms that allow you to use a credit card, digital money, are not only very delicate, but they are very elaborate. It's an arcane network of clearing mechanisms, and we've seen
All right, let me jump in here for a second, Rick, and give some historical perspective. So back in the 2008 global financial crisis, the response from policymakers and bankers was to inject trillions, tens of trillions of dollars into the economy around the world. Most people predicted, yeah, this will cause inflation. In fact, all that money printing exacerbated a trend toward deflation, principally because all it did was keep the zombie banks from having to declare insolvency, and they in turn did not lend out any of that money. And so the economy just kept on shrinking, right?
Yeah, and we lost a couple pretty big players in that bailout. Bear Stearns bit the dust, and some very big mortgage lenders. And you wonder whether we could do it again. You lose a certain amount of capital and credibility every time you try to reinflate the global financial system. It's quite a project. And you know that this has been a subject that you've talked about a great deal, that we really didn't learn much from the 2007-8 crash. And, we've had huge leveraging going on. I guess as we emerge from each one of these episodes, the critical question is, what can we hawk 50 times over to get things going again? And as you see, we've sort of hawked the energy past this time. And to some extent, the housing bubble has reemerged. But I tell my subscribers on that day that I think is inevitable when the banks don't open, that you're probably better off having a shoebox with 5s, 10s, and 20s in it than a roll of Krugerrands. It's mainly because I think that on that first day when we're trying to figure out how to pay for necessities, you go to the grocery store and they're not going to understand Krugerrands as well as 5s, 10s, and 20s. So I think that the currency that we currently use, which, if you follow the money trail, you realize that our currency is fundamentally worthless. It would have utility value in a pinch.
All right, let's examine some of the cross currents here, because certainly the banking system is as fragile as ever. It's over-leveraged. A bank like Deutsche Bank is much more leveraged and much more vulnerable and poses a much more systemic risk than either Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers ever did. But at the same time, we've got prices rising in things like education and healthcare. But that's a case where you have loss of competition due to the fact that there's so much mergers and acquisitions with this cheap money. You've lost a lot of the competition out there, so monopoly pricing has come into play. Healthcare costs are going up because the competition's been gutted. That's where the inflation is. It's not inflation like wages are going up. No, wages are going down. It's a combination of gouging and deflation, what I call gougeflation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you can see where it's very easy using monetary stimulus to inflate the financial economy. But it's quite another thing to monetize, let's say, the monthly pension checks that go out to zillions of employees. So, and also, I've come to believe that a lot of things that people say are inflationary, well, Rick, you're talking about deflation. How can you even think of that if you paid your healthcare bills recently or you put a kid through college? But if you take you start with the fact that wage growth has been stagnant for a generation, then we really can't have an inflation that feeds on itself. If we're paying more for one thing, then it has to come out of what we might have spent on something else. So one example of that would be, when oil prices came down just for a bit below $30 a barrel, you might think we'd be celebrating in the streets because it would be a stimulus for retail. But of course, you had a huge offset in the effective new tax of Obamacare. So whatever we saved as gas prices came down here in the States from $4 to under $2 was spent 5 times over in increased healthcare premiums.
All right, let's talk about oil for a second. When prices fell to below 30, almost every financial commentator in the news said this would lead to a consumer boom. It never did. Remarkably now, whenever prices are rising, markets are saying, hey, that's great. We're going much higher with these markets. This seems like, again, mixed signals or false signals or a failure in price signaling. What do you think?
Well, it turns out that the $2 a gallon that we were saving on gas, it wasn't enough to drive traffic to Walmart. And you can see now there are other offsets. You know, Walmart is looking at in many states at an increase in the minimum wage to $15, and the old story was, well, that's inflationary, but it really isn't. It's hugely deflationary in the sense that Walmart's going to figure out how to eliminate a lot of jobs so that they can cover their costs. And
right, let me jump in there for a second. You talk about jobs, and so when the oil prices crashed and the rig count is down, and Houston is once again the see-through city, it's lost a lot of these 6-figure fracking jobs have been lost, et cetera. So you save money at the gas pump, but you lost your job. So the net of all that is actually more deflationary, in working its way into the system. Now, on this other side of this trade, the oil currencies from the loonie, the Canadian loonie, to the Brazilian real, Russian ruble, tumbled hard and fast. Saudi Arabia, whose currency is pegged to the dollar, has had hundreds of billions less to recycle into treasuries. So here you have another piece of the global equation, the petrodollar being impacted by these trends and cross currents. Your thoughts on the petrodollar, Saudi Arabia, how that's going to happen going forward, what we might see?
You know, we've had a pretty close tie in 2016 between crude prices and U.S. stock prices. And it's not too difficult to see that Wall Street is more or less obsessed with getting the price of oil up. But the oddity, you know, usually the bullish story on oil has been driven by the demand side. You know, in the past, we've thought, well, and this happened in 2008 as we emerged from recession, this would be a natural driver of crude prices. But this time, I think you can see the desperation in the oil story. There are a couple ways it comes. One is that you're going to have collusion between some of the major producers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia. But, you know, they're all strapped themselves. So they're going to keep pumping. And it's particularly true for Iran. You're never going to bring their natural gas supplies under any form of constraint. So it was always, that story was always a non-starter. But, you know, the most unbelievable story, well, to look at it broadly, they're trying to drive oil higher on the demand side, and I'm sorry, on the supply side. So it's not a matter of, well, oil prices are going to go nuts because the global economy is in recovery. Nobody believes that. So the story becomes, it's sort of mutated so that the major suppliers, Venezuela, and Nigeria are 2 very large suppliers. The Venezuela story is any time now something could happen. The Venezuela could descend further into mayhem and chaos, and they wouldn't be pumping any oil at all. And you know, as far as the Nigerian story, Nigeria has somewhat curtailed supplies, but the idea that supplies are going to come down, they're going to chase a falling demand to the extent that it's going to force prices up, I think that's ridiculous. So I see everything from oil's bottom this year at $27 a barrel up to a current 47 or so as a dead cat bounce. And although I could, my technical forecast put oil up into the low 50s, I don't see much more than that.
Finally, we've got about 40 seconds left. U.S. pensions. Truck driving is the #1 job in many American states. The Teamsters pension fund is bust after Goldman Sachs had the dirty war with it. Okay, pensions, they play into this whole scenario between inflation and deflation, how it plays out with interest rates or lack of interest rates. What's going to happen to pensions going forward? Rick Ackerman, we got about 30 seconds.
Well, it's a disaster. As I was saying, you can't monetize the pension problem. And all of the big investors that have obligations down the road, not only pension trusts, but the big insurers, they're still acting as though they're going to get 8% returns over the long haul. So we're really in denial to think that there's not a disaster coming. There was just a report out by JP Morgan that said some states, like New Jersey for one, no matter how you do the math, they're not going to make themselves whole with respect to pension liabilities.
All right,
So
Rick Ackerman, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thanks for inviting me on, Max.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Rick Ackerman of Rick's Picks newsletter at rickackerman.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.